In the early part of the 20th century, psychologists John Watson and Rosalie Rayner set out to teach a baby boy called little Albert to fear white rats using the principle of classical conditioning. This is a film of their work. The film shows several phases of their study. First, as you see here, the investigators demonstrated that prior to conditioning, little Albert had no fears of any animals, including, of course, white rats. Watson and Rayner then sought to teach Albert to fear white rats through classical conditioning. In the conditioning phase of the study, which was not filmed, the investigators struck a steel bar with a hammer whenever Albert reached for a rat, making a very loud noise that greatly upset and frightened Albert. After 6 such pairings of the loud noise and the rat, it was believed that the boy had been conditioned to fear white rats. That is, Albert was now expected to react fearfully to white rats whether the rats were paired with loud noises or not. In this next film sequence, we see Albert interacting with a white rat after the conditioning process. The investigators believed that the child's reaction during this trial demonstrated his newly acquired fear of white rats. Finally, the investigators expected that little Albert's conditioned fear of white rats would generalize to stimuli that were similar in key ways to a white rat. In this film segment, they were trying to demonstrate that the child now also reacted fearfully to similar objects, such as a rabbit, a dog, a furry object, and a white mask worn by Watson himself.
Around the turn of the century, the great Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov made an accidental discovery that was to become a landmark in the field of learning. Pavlov was studying the salivation reflex in dogs as part of his research on digestion. He noticed that after the dogs had been brought to the laboratory many times, they would start to salivate even before food was given. What had altered the dog's inborn salivation reflex? Pavlov was fascinated and changed the direction of his research to focus on what he called conditional reflexes. Pavlov knew that placing food in the dog's mouth naturally caused salivation. The unconditioned stimulus food produced the unconditioned response, salivation. Through a series of ingenious experiments, he found that if a new and unrelated stimulus, like a bell, was repeatedly sounded before the food was given, the dogs would learn to salivate when they heard the bell, even when no food followed. The conditioned stimulus, the bell, produced the conditioned response, salivation. Moreover, almost any type of stimulus, when paired with food, could produce salivation. This process of learning by association became known as classical conditioning.
Pavlov's contribution in introducing the concept of classical conditioning was to bring to us an understanding of how we learn by association, how we learn that one thing leads to another. This has been particularly important in helping us understand how certain autonomic or automatic physiological responses come to occur in new situations in which they didn't normally occur. One practical application of classical conditioning is the work of Dr. John Garcia, who confronted the problem of coyotes who would attack farmers' livestock.
Destroying these predators upsets the delicate ecological balance. But how else could these animals be controlled? Psychologists John Garcia and Carl Gustavusson developed a new strategy based on the concepts of classical conditioning. Lamb meat is laced with lithium chloride, a chemical that produces nausea when eaten. The treated meat is then wrapped in sheep hide and put out as bait near grazing flocks. When the coyotes eat the bait, they immediately become sick and vomit. The predators quickly learn to associate sheep with nausea and actively avoid the animals. More and more, ranchers are using this approach to protect their flocks while preserving the delicate ecology of the rangelands.
The segment you're about to see is taken from an early experiment on learning of aggressive styles of behavior through modeling. Children watched a filmed adult perform novel aggressive acts toward a inflated doll, and the physical aggression was accompanied by novel hostile remarks. We later measured how much of this modeled aggression the children had learned just by watching. Now, the measurement of learning of aggression uses simulated targets rather than live ones. The model pummeled the doll with a mallet, flung it in the air, kicked it repeatedly, threw it down and beat it. It was once widely believed that seeing others vent aggression would drain the viewer's aggressive drive. As you can see, exposure to aggressive modeling is hardly cathartic. Exposure to aggressive modeling increased attraction to guns, even though it was never modeled. Guns had less appeal to children who had no exposure to the aggressive modeling. The children also picked up the novel hostile language. The room contained varied play materials, and children could choose to play aggressively or non-aggressively. The children devised new ways of hitting the doll. Now, the object of interest was the novel aggressive acts, not punching the doll. And children in the control group who had no exposure to the aggressive modeling never exhibited the novel forms of aggression. And here's a creative embellishment. A doll becomes a weapon of assault.